Hey, welcome. Today we are talking about a financial X-ray. There's a lot of people who look at their life and they have some ideas, but they don't have a good perception on what is going on in their actual life. A lot of people look at net worth. We're going to talk about net worth, cash flow, liquidity. How do you really know if you're on track? How do you really know if you're doing well? Randy, you probably remember that ad years ago where it said like, "What's your number?" It had people walking around the city. It had like a big number above their heads.
Yep. I've got 1,000,005. That's my number. Or I've got, whatever. And they're saying this is the amount of money I need in order to retirement. And this I'm working towards that, or that's what I already have. And it varies from household to household depending upon various factors. And we're going to kind of get into that. We're going to talk about doing a financial X-ray. None of us like to go. I mean, again, the anticipation of an X-ray is everything's going to be fine. But what you don't want the doctor to say is, oh, by the way, we found something. And we need to go further tests, and we need to get a little further examination to make sure that we got this thing taken care of. That creates anxiety and such. In finance is what we find, Jeremiah, is that people just kind of avoid it. They just, no, we're not going to do anything. Everything's okay, right?
Yeah, for good or for bad, the finance industry and personal finance, people have so many like a rule of thumb. Hey, I'm just going to go off of this. And even that ad where they had the number above their head, I need 1.5 million. That ad was probably, I think if I remember right, it was what you had in your retirement account. Hey, I have $1 million in my retirement account. That's what I need. Other people like to use this net worth to say I took all my assets, my house and my retirement, and I subtracted the debt, and now I get this net number of what I'm worth. And it's part of the picture, right? But it's not the full picture. And I think to your comment, Randy, people sometimes will fixate on one metric and say, this is what I need. As long as I can get this, I'll be okay. But it's a rule of thumb. It's not the same for everybody. And so today, I think we're talking through what are the things you really want to look at as an X-ray to understand if your life is on track, if you're trending in the right direction. And the first one I think is that your net worth. To what have you built over time as far as value? So it's things like your homes, your retirement accounts, your investment accounts, subtracted by the debt, and then what's left. There's some people, we laugh that we had a family member who is in the medical profession and a lot of school loans and debt. And as they moved into practice and they bought a practice, which included some more debt, they were planning to have a net zero party, basically saying, right now, like their assets compared to their debt was so much higher because they had school debt and company debt. But they were at some point in life, they were going to get back to all of our assets equal all of our debts. So we're at net zero. We're worth nothing. How wonderful. But for them, that was part of the celebration as they're on the path towards building up certain assets.
Yeah. And there's a difference between personal assets and business assets. And if you look at the debt and how that how that affects both of them, or what's the process there of analyzing that debt. I think that's really important that you have a key distinction between the business balance sheet and the personal balance sheet. Now, for most people, they're tied together to some degree. I mean, you can't go to the bank and borrow money without get a personal guarantee. Again, thinking through circumstances that would be an emergency, that all of a sudden there'd be a hiccup. How are you going to get through that? And some people are very vulnerable. Other people have a foundation that, you remember the Bible story about the waves coming in and hitting the house. And if it's just built on the sand, it just washes it away. It looks good. Sandcastles look good, but will they withstand a storm? And I think what we want to do is build a storm. I guess what I'm searching for the word, but I mean, it can absolutely be fortified.
Right. Well, I even think about, anyone who's listening, think about their neighbors on the same street, right? You could have a neighbor next to you who has, a nice house, car, feels like they're living the same life. But they may have a whole bunch of debt, a whole bunch of other obligations. So they might be at that net zero, right? Even though it looks nice on the outside, there's no actual value. Whereas on the other side of your house, you may have a very different neighbor who has paid off their mortgage, paid off their cars, and has the other assets built up. So they may be the millionaire next door. You never think that, Mrs. Smith down the street is actually the most wealthy person on the block. And net worth is a great tool. It's not the only tool, but it's the first step, I'd say, as part of this X-ray of, is everything mortgaged? Is everything financed? Or is there actual net value there to kind of determine your net?
Yeah. And I think it's a matter of what is your profit? What is your debt? All these factors are really, really important. And I think you have to be really cold and analytical about what your future looks like. Can I withstand a hiccup in my business? So again, it's just a matter of understanding what that, all the factors that can affect you. But I think avoid looking at your equity in your business as it's going to be produced for you no matter what. Equity in business typically is non-liquid. You can't just sell the business or liquidate a part of it and get a return. I've got a client who invested in non-liquid assets and then stepped into retirement. And then all of a sudden, the assets themselves were going through churning. He couldn't get the income out of it. He had several $1 million in assets, but they were not performing, and he couldn't sell any of them. He said, "But I got all this money." And I said, "It's not available to you right now until you liquidate it." So
Mm.
again, I think everybody has this understanding of what's the best asset to own for those kinds of circumstances.
Yeah, I love that. Even just the illustration of how do you get to the assets? What is the asset doing for you? I guess the next one is part of this X-ray. First we talk about net worth. As we move to the next one, kind of what you said, Randy, is the liquid versus illiquid. Meaning, can you get to the money? And so we have a number of clients, old real estate. We have one specifically that they had a large real estate portfolio, but everything felt tied up. And so they didn't feel that they could access any of it. And so even though they had good resources, if they needed to pull some things together to use some of the money, and they didn't have it because it was all tied up, similar to the individual you mentioned that they couldn't trade it. And so part of the X-ray that we like to look at is not just what's your net worth. That's one figure. The next is, how liquid are you? How quickly could you get to your resources if you needed them? Whether it was a health scare, a business negative side, or even if it's just an opportunity. Someone comes to you with the next great idea and you're like, that is incredible. Do you have the ability to move on it?
And some people they'll stretch to do that. They will look at an opportunity and they get these eyes of wealth and they're thinking, wow, well, this would be great. But they don't realize what they're doing is they're jeopardizing all of their foundation, all their investments going after one thing. And that one thing then falls apart, right?
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes, I think you, Randy, probably brought this up the first time, was from Charlie Munger, who's one of Warren Buffett's. He was his business partner for years and years. But he talked about the hardest part of investing was watching good investments go by and keeping your cash and waiting for a great investment. When they saw a great investment, then they'd go in and buy it. But basically keeping that cash free and available, he said, was the hardest discipline part of the investing. I mean, I think it's the same for people as well. Like, to have cash that's not tied up, that's available, is important for your liquidity, but it's hard. It's hard to not jump at every good opportunity or every item.
Yep, for sure.
That's
And when
good.
Charlie emphasized it, somebody asked me, he said, what was your primary goal? He says, my primary goal was just to get to the point that I'm financially independent. I was not dependent on anything or anybody else for my lifestyle. And he paused. He said, well, I just overshot. Well, okay, great. But he was able to do a lot of great things with that wealth that he had too.
Yeah, yeah. But I think to make a comment here is that illiquid assets are not bad. So buying a commercial real estate property, right? We consider that illiquid, meaning that you're going to have that for a number of years or decades. And if you needed to sell it, it's going to take some time. It's going to take, but a commercial property is a great asset that could benefit your future. It's really as part of this X-ray of just acknowledging, how much of your assets are tied up and how much of that is appropriate. All of your assets are liquid, and you have zero tied up in something that's long term, that's probably also a negative. You want to have something that is a long term investment, but you also have to be mindful that not everything is long term investment.
Yeah, I think the illiquid investments, does it demand something from you? Does it demand you to make money and to feed it?
Mm,
Because, a lot of people will borrow, but the question is, will this business be requiring additional capital? I've seen some really smart people and they'll open up a company, whatever. I remember an attorney and he bought a company. And at that point in time, he said, I'm putting the cost of a Lexus every month into this company. So his reserves, what he's talking about is his reserves are going down.
mm,
How soon will the company then start coming up and he'll stop taking out reserves? And this is a man that was what I would say very sophisticated and smart, but you have to be realistic with yourself and have real expectations of what it's going to take before the business can start supporting itself and paying its bills, right? So,
yep, that's right. And that applies to businesses very much so. It also applies to real estate. A lot of people see their home as an investment, which to some extent it is, but also at the same time, you have to pay a mortgage, right? You have to pay into that. And when it's your own home, right, there's no renters. There's no one paying that for you. When it's a commercial
yeah.
property, the same thing applies, whether it's a residential rental or a commercial building. If you don't have a tenant that's able to build that up, you have to keep paying into it, right? So being mindful of how many of these investments require, additional from you.
Yeah, I mean, the personal home, it requires costs. You have to put money into it
Yeah,
anyway.
that's right. Well, we can move forward. So we talked about net worth, and then we just talked about liquidity. The third one I think is really important is cash flow. And this is dovetailing off of what we just talked about. But cash flow, to say what's coming in and what does it take to run your life. So we're talking about personal here, not just your business, but your personal. And so in your personal life, what is the expense you need, to keep your lifestyle going? And what is coming in from either your job or your assets? And I guess I'd say I'm surprised on a regular basis of how many people don't have those two numbers really dialed in. They have them because they're living their life, right? But there's an income to your home and there's an expense to your home, and that in theory should be a nice little flow. And hopefully, it's also adding to your reserves. It's adding
Yep.
to your investments. Some people go the other way, that every month, like you said, right, they're putting in out of their reserves, they're putting into this cash flow. But high earners, especially, I think have struggles with this, mainly because I think it taxes. Everything seems like it's working great. And then they get to the end of a quarter and they have these quarterly estimates due. And they realize, I don't have an extra chunk of money to
I
do
wasn't
this.
really planning for that, right? And government is really a he's a taskmaster. And if you don't have it, the penalties and the fees and everything else on late payments, in a short time it can double what you have to pay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's so many people don't look at it properly.
Right. Well, and often CPAs will look at a year and see what happened, give you the result, and then they'll give you some estimates for the next year. I think there is 10 minutes even worth of looking at those estimates that can save people a lot of pain and suffering by saying, usually the CPA puts together your estimates just based on what happened last year, assuming you will be identical the next year. And it's a, take 5-10 minutes and just think, do I expect to get a raise? Do I think some of those, tax savings that happened this year, like, putting solar on my house or whatever happened, is that going to happen again next year? Just to get a sense of, is this estimate anywhere near realistic? And we've had a number of clients who they'll tell us as the advisor, oh yeah, I'm going to get a big bonus this year. It's like, wonderful. That's great. Did you tell your tax person when they did these estimates? They'll say, no, that's just separate. Well, there's a really good moment for planning to look forward and say, what do I think my business is going to do? Let me work to stay on track for my estimates. And that's just one piece of
Again,
cash flow.
and we lie to ourselves. We have expectations that we build in our head, the emotional value of that. And then when the reality comes down, what did you actually get?
Mm,
What was your actual benefit from the leverage that you put into this particular, whether it be a business owner or as an employee? Were you expecting something? Was it in writing? Was it certain? Was the company going to give you something based on a profitability that may or may not happen? You want to be very careful about what you hold on as certain, because life can be very uncertain. Prime example for me is that prior to 2008, I was approached by a bank that says, you know, we're offering home equity lines of credit. And I went, this is probably a good time to borrow money because I don't need it. I wasn't using any of it. I got as high as I could get as far as a home equity line of credit. 2008 occurred. Now, the fact that I had mine termed out for over 10 years, so if I went back to that bank, if I used that money and I needed that capital for an investment, I would have been up a creek without a paddle, because they said they lowered all their expectations for real estate, and it went down because they loaned me the money when I had the capital and the equity and everything else. I had a reserve of money that I could use through the bad times.
mm,
And yeah, it was a great illustration, is that you borrow money when you don't need it, when you talk to the bank. The bank is your friend when you got plenty of income and plenty of assets. But when you go through a recession like 28, they look at you with really jaundiced eyes. It's like, can he pay that back? What's gonna
mm.
happen there? Anyway, so again, that cash flow and planning, and it just is really critically important that you do certain things to protect your assets, right?
Yeah, that's right. I got one more category. So part of this excerpt, we talked about your net worth. We talked about how liquid are you. We talked about your cash flow. The last one I think is really important for people to look at is this hidden concentration.
My
And
goodness, yes.
we see this a lot with business owners, is that they don't naturally realize that, 90% of their wealth, 90% of their future stability is all tied to their one business. And when they think of their investing, often they're putting their 401ks or things like that potentially into the same business. They're moving all this forward. So there's a potential to concentrate all your assets in the things you understand, whether it's real estate, your own business, certain companies that you like. And you may not realize how dependent you are on that one industry or that one asset or that one business.
Yeah, and I think that protecting an asset, you don't know exactly what the economic world's going to throw at you, but at the same point in time, you have hints. You get some really good warnings that this is going to be good or it's going to be bad, and you don't know how good it's going to be, and you don't know how bad it's going to be.
Mm,
But that's where it comes down to. You got to hedge your bets, and people get so concentrated They get so focused on very either one or very few number of assets, and all of a sudden the world turns on them. And it can be devastating to people. Going through bankruptcy is a brutal process, and for most people, it is not something that they desire to do, but they don't think about it. And I'm looking at what happens if this thing all rolls over on you. What happens if real estate or the thing you're manufacturing or the work that you're doing just turns bad? Nobody wants your product anymore. Everything. Right now, we're moving in a great deal of change. There's a lot of, so to speak, revolution with digitalization and AI and everything else. A lot of people are unprepared for it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and there's a balance here because, we said many times before, like concentrating your risk is often how you build wealth, but diversifying your risk is how you maintain wealth. And for a lot of people, you're doing both at the same time, right? You're trying to build your company, you're trying to build your net worth, but you also want to protect what you already have. And there's a little bit of inflection points along the way. For example, a business owner who has a garage based business, they're putting everything into it, right? They're trying to make this work. Then they find some success. They're manufacturing. They're really thriving in their business. It's a really good moment for them potentially to buy their own building. And part of what that is doing is diversifying from just the operational business to now owning a building that you could eventually have a tenant in the future. A client that he was running his business and decided to transition it over to his employees. At first, he was going to sell and have these bigger figures, but then realized he had bought the building, decades ago. So he had a large amount of value in just the building. So rather than having to sell the business itself for a high dollar, he sold it for a fairly low dollar, but just became the landlord and charged reasonable rent. And that reasonable rent on the building was more than what he needed to live off of. And because he had diversified by buying his own building, he now had a business and a building that created a path for him in the future. So, people who are building their wealth, it's important to be concentrated. But as you go through your life, you want to make sure that you're also diversifying as appropriate at certain times, whether it's real estate, other holdings, things like that.
People, I mean, again, entrepreneurs by and large believe that they're kind of bulletproof and they've got this idea and they're pushing it. And, Jeremiah, you and I have seen people where they've got so excited about an idea and the next thing you know, they're trying to figure out how to get out of it, because it's got a hold of them and there's no timeline that's going to let go. And it's really hard for people to really understand that there is risk. This is not going to be always Pollyanna. This is not always going to be blue skies for you.
Yep, that's right. So kind of recap a little bit, when we talk about an x-ray of your finances to, just like Randy said at the beginning, going to a doctor, seeing what's going on under the surface. The things that we think of is, look at your net worth. That's an important number. It's not the only number, but it's an important one. Looking at liquidity, if I needed to get to this money, how soon or how quickly could I get to it? The third kind of being your cash flow. What's coming in, what's going out? Are we moving in the right direction? And then the fourth one being hidden concentration. Are all my eggs in one basket? Even if I like the basket, right? Are all my eggs just in one basket? And just being mindful of what that looks like. And we walk through a lot of clients that there's no one right answer, but it's also not even just an answer per person. It changes over time. When you're in your 20s and 30s and 40s, these ratios and these desires are different than when you're in your 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so if anyone out there needs an x-ray, right? They need a better understanding. They need to look at below the surface what's really going on. And I think these kind of four categories are good ones to consider and good ones to look at.
Yep. Until next week, folks, may you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.
We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit tricordadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@tricordadvisors.com or simply click on the link in the show note.
We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Tricord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.